Well, hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to this, the fourth in our series of In Conversation with events with colleagues from different sectors of the business community. My name is Michael Craig, and I'll be the host for today's session. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Susan McInnes, an experienced financial services professional and former Chief Executive of Standard Life. Before we invite Susan to speak to us this evening, a few items of housekeeping. Firstly, this evening's session will be recorded, with the edited highlights being shown on social media and YouTube over the coming weeks. Secondly, if you've not already done so, please do switch off your microphones so that our speaker can be heard clearly and without distraction. And thirdly, it would be great if you would participate in tonight's discussion, and you can do so by using the chat function on Zoom. And my Business Matters colleague, Eric Smith, will be keeping a close eye on the contributions from the audience, and I'll be inviting Eric to share some of your thoughts and questions after we've heard from Susan. So without further ado, let me welcome Susan to our session. So Susan, it's absolutely great to see you. Susan, I think you're aware, over recent months, we've been exploring what the future of work might look like as we come through the disruption and the innovation that we've experienced over the past year. And we've been looking at this topic under the 3 R's of resilience, reskilling, and relationships. And we'll return to these topics again during the course of today's conversation. But before we do so, perhaps Susan, you could kick us off with your own reflections on what the past 12 months have meant for how executives think about work, its purpose, what it means for staff, and what further changes we might expect over the next few months.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, and thank you very much for inviting me this evening. I really appreciate that. So I think I'll try not to generalise for all execs, but I'll give you a personal view of what I think it's been like over the last 12 months. I mean, I do think it's been an absolutely unique year. Certainly in my career, it's been a unique year for everybody and for execs. We have seen significant employment changes when we think about the number of people who've been made unemployed, who've been furloughed, who've been, the change to home working, the change to key working. We've definitely seen so many employment changes. And I think we've also seen loads of employment challenges. And it maybe touches a little bit on your reskilling point. I'll give you a few observations on what I think those challenges have been. I think when I think about the last 12 months, 13 months, whatever it is, one of the things that strikes me is the speed that everything has happened. I've got a financial services background, but I'm sure the things I'm going to say are unique to my industry, but the speed of response from employers has been incredible. If we had done what we did at the time that COVID hit, if we'd done that in peacetime, if we'd been talking about making those changes, about moving colleagues to work from home, about changing the way we interact with customers, if we'd have done that in peacetime, in our industry, we'd still be writing the terms of reference. Never mind having implemented it and it existing for 12 months. So I think the speed of change has been remarkable. That has brought some risk with it though, and that's not something that executives, I think, have found comfortable. How you make those changes, but still keep colleagues safe and keep customers safe as you do that, while we're thinking about things like cybercrime, because that speed gives opportunity to some people. So I think one observation has been about speed. I think the other observation I would have is that the model's really turned on its head, isn't it? Because the world I came from had 95% of people in an office and a 5% of people working from home. And my observation would be that from an employment point of view, that 5%, we were quite reluctant about those. And it's absolutely flipped. And we've now got 95% of people working from home, and we've got 5% of people that we're reluctantly having as key workers and are in offices. So that model change has brought about, I think, some behavioural changes needed to manage that properly. So again, I'm thinking a little bit about your reskilling point, because there's been skills that have had to come to the fore that might not have been at the fore pre-COVID. And I'm thinking about things like the challenges of how you supervise a workforce that is remote, challenges for people about training and learning, because I know when I learned, you know, by somebody sitting beside me, and I would work away for a while, and then if I had a question, I would turn to somebody. And in this remote world, that's harder to do. And I think it gives you different challenges in how you keep your workforce skilled. There's clearly been technology challenges. It's just amazing, you know, how the technology has supported workers. But another thing I think that's been a bit of a challenge is living accommodation. I always think I am so privileged. I've worked from home this whole pandemic, and I've been so lucky to be in a place where I've got a spare room. I can come, I can shut the door, I'm not disturbing the rest of the family, and I can broadly get on with my work. But I've got colleagues who, you know, that they might be flat sharing, and they're doing their job sharing a kitchen table with somebody. Or I have another colleague who sent me a picture, and she's got her laptop up on her ironing board, sitting on her bed. Now, brilliant, fair play to her, what a wonderful commitment. But doing that for a year is not an easy thing to do. So I feel very privileged, and working from home for me is very different from working from home for others. And how you support those people is not easy. So I think it's been it's a difficult time for people emotionally. And I think that has made emotional intelligence almost come from a management and leadership perspective. That has become a really important skill, as important as IQ has always been. I think EQ has nudged itself up there. I think another observation would be communication for execs has become different. I learned a lot about the mood of the area I worked in by just listening as I went down in the lift, and as I made myself a cup of coffee, and you haven't got that informal network anymore. So I think communication and how we do that, and you cannot, in my view, over communicate in these times. So people who relied on informal communication, I think we've now had to absolutely put formal communication far more front and centre. Yeah. That's a bit looking back. If I think about going forward, I listened to your last month's session with the millennials, which I thought was really interesting. But when I reflect on some of the language they used, and they talked, I got the sense from your group that they were itching to get back to work. They wanted back to the office, and I'm sure there are great groups that want to do that want to go back to what they had before. I think that equally, though, there are groups who have managed really well at home, who really enjoy, and perhaps if they've got a bit more space in their house, they've enjoyed working from home, they've made it work, they've enjoyed more flexibility around how they work. They've changed their living situation. I'm amazed always, you know, when I do big Zoom calls, how many new pets I see, kind of new pets, puppies, and new babies. We've seen a kind of baby boom in lockdown, haven't we? People have changed their lives, actually. And I think they will want to think differently about how and when and if they go back to that. And people will want hybrid. So I think one of the challenges going forward is how we make that work, and we don't create a tension about employers thinking people are going to go back, or people downsizing offices and not assuming that people want to go back. So I think one of the future challenges is going to be about how we accommodate, harmoniously accommodate people and employment, if that makes sense.
It does, and you've given us so much. There's those initial sort of reflections, Susan, that I'm sure our audience are already starting to anticipate or think about some additional kind of follow-up questions. We'll come back to reskilling, and we'll come back to relationships. You've talked about emotional intelligence, which in some ways is sort of linked a bit to our theme of resilience. From your perspective, how do you interpret resilience, and how do you personally remain resilient during periods of stress or change?
So I think for me, Michael, resilience is not about kind of being able to breeze through everything, all the difficulties that we're going to face in life, because we are all going to face difficulties, aren't we, to varying degrees. For me, the way I think about resilience, it's about toughness. It's about kind of your ability to bounce back when you do hit the things that we all inevitably hit. I remember somebody saying to me that I worked with years ago, describing each kind of thing you hit like a bouncing ball. So they described it as, if you can imagine the issue being the first time the ball bounces, and they kind of sent me this picture of kind of everything you hit, the ball doesn't bounce as high the next time, and they kind of painted me this picture of the more things you have to go through, the further you never come right back up there again. And I have to say, I didn't subscribe to the theory, because I think for me, it's about toughness and positivity. When as you did, Michael, when you and I worked together, we worked in a building with a couple of thousand people in it, and I was always acutely aware that a significant percentage of those people would be going through some personal or professional crisis issue, and I was always amazed at how resilient people were. They had real personal difficulties, and yet still came to their work. And they were positive, and they approached things with energy and commitment. So I think I think of myself as a really resilient person, a really positive person, and I try to approach situations positively where I can, because it helps me. But I think a little bit about COVID, and when COVID first hit and we got through the initial crisis of how we were going to cope, and we all went home. As much as I think of myself as a resilient, positive person, I found the early days of COVID difficult, because every time I turned on the television, it was so negative. And thinking about what people were going through across the world was difficult to see the positivity for me. I found it, and I found myself getting flatter and flatter as time went on. And I as many people do, exercise is something that I use to keep myself resilient. And I'm a jogger. I can't call myself a runner, in case anybody's actually seen me doing it and know that it's such a slow thing, but I'm a jogger, and I jog. I live in Glasgow, as you'll get from this dreadful accent, but I jog regularly round kind of Kelvin Grove Park and round the Kelvin. And I jog with my son's girlfriend, who also lives here. And one day we went out jogging to try and kind of perk ourselves up. And we came home and thought that we didn't feel any better. And when we reflected on why that was, we had, in the relatively early days of COVID, and everybody we'd passed that morning looked really flat. They were looking down, they were usually on their own, a wee bit older. And we came home and thought that, it hadn't been a great experience. So we decided we would, that actually our resilience, a lot of our resilience came from positivity we got from other people. And we weren't getting it. So we weren't in a work environment. We didn't have that buzz, and we didn't have, we didn't have a positive interaction with people. Everything we were hearing from the media was negative. So we decided we would try, as we jogged, to say good morning, to smile and say good morning to everybody. So as we ran, I'm sure you have this dreadful picture in your mind now, but as we ran round, we made an effort to smile and to say good morning. And kind of probably the first couple of days we got startled reactions, and but then people, it's usually the same people, and eventually we could see people. Once we got a really good, nice, positive response, and we could see people smiling at us before we turned up, a few days in, and that really lifted us. And we hope it lifted them a bit, because a lot of these people probably never saw anybody else that whole day. So I think there is something about, there's something about giving positivity and getting positivity that really helps resilience. And I note that somewhere a joint friend of ours, David Hare, is on the line. And David told me about he was kind enough to give me a link to a really interesting online session with a doctor, Dr. David Hamilton, I think, who had been doing research into the link between kindness and physical health. I think we all knew it was good for your mental health, but he has done clinical studies on proving it's actually good for your heart health. I'm fascinated by that, and I definitely think that in terms of resilience, I can, and I'm sure others can, get a lot from that. I think it helps me cope with periods of stress and change. I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to say I'm one of these people that loves change. I'm not, and it makes me nervous, it makes me a bit anxious. But if I try and think of the positivity and the good that can come from it, then it makes me a lot less anxious. Sorry for the ramble.
No, that's fantastic. And thank you, David, for that really interesting kind of link. We must follow up on that if we can.
Yeah, David speaks about it much more eloquently than I can.
No, thank you. So, Susan, you've talked about the pace of change, that not just the volume of change, but the speed with which change has been introduced, and you've acknowledged that not everyone embraces change or looks forward to having to deal with that. Can be stressful. We know we've had a lot about the fact that we're trying to sort of build back better or build a fairer, greener economy. We've over the last sort of few weeks, as part of the current election campaign, we've heard a lot about what kind of society we're trying to build and develop. And I'm just wondering, Susan, what are your sort of thoughts on how companies can sort of build on what they've been doing over the last sort of year or so, and really try and contribute towards a sort of fairer, greener economy? And what does that mean, from the point of view of individual members of staff?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time to be asking and thinking about the question, isn't it? Because as much as this pandemic has been a tragedy, and it definitely has been, we've probably got a real chance, a real point in history to do something different. And they do say that, don't they, that kind of disasters give you that opportunity. Because if I think about the pandemic hit when the bits of the economy were really fragile to start with, and I think there are pockets of society that have been hit really badly, particularly, the unfairly treated have probably been even more unfairly treated as we've gone through this. We've seen kind of low wage jobs, particularly in the service industry, really badly affected here, and more prone to COVID than anybody else. So I think we've definitely got an opportunity to do something about it. When I think about it from a firm perspective, the positive I would say is, if I think about this 10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, these kind of conversations about a fairer economy and a greener economy and, ESG, or they were grassroots conversations. They were about, activists in your organisation who were kind of pushing those messages up the way. and I'm not sure how well they were being heard by senior employees. And hasn't that flipped? Because, and okay, I'm sure they've been forced to flip, but it's great that these are now boardroom conversations. And I think it's so important that firms make this part of their strategy, and make it part of their strategy and their goals and their measures, and publish them, because I genuinely believe, and I was fascinated to listen to your millennials when they spoke. People they've got choices. You know, today's generation have got choices about where they work, and now that work can be more flexible, people in Glasgow can work for London companies and be at home. So to attract the very best talent, you're going to have to take these things seriously and make it part of your DNA. Because if it's not part of your DNA and people don't feel it's part of your DNA, they won't work for you. They'll work for somebody else. So I think it's important that it's part of the culture. But I was on a call just the other day, and people were talking about net carbon, carbon zero, and they were saying, I don't know how I'm going to get there. Well, of course you don't, but it doesn't stop you making the commitment. And it doesn't stop you, being brave and saying, it's what I want to do. I'll kind of work out how I'm going to get there. But I think employees want to see firms be brave. So it's a bit about, clearly we want big firms we want them to encourage them to have social and environmental, sound practices, but we want them to be brave. And I think colleagues want them to be brave. It's funny, silly example, but I was talking to somebody the other day who had learned jazz piano. So they were apparently classically trained, and they'd learned jazz piano online in lockdown. And I was thinking, if it hadn't been for lockdown, you would have, and somebody had said to you, you can learn jazz piano and I'll teach you online, you would have thought, that can't be done. It absolutely can't be done. And yet you think differently, and it can be done, and it has been done. So I think what big firms need to think about is, let's just be brave and work out, let's set ourselves the goal, and then we'll work out how to get there.
Fantastic. We're at 6:10. So just a couple more questions from me, Susan, and then would love to hear from the audience. So if you can be thinking about what sort of follow-up questions you might want to ask Susan. But if we turn now to our third R, Susan, I think we would all recognise the importance of our networks and our relationships as we seek to develop our careers. As we think about this hybrid or remote working model that we seem now to be very much entering into, how would you recommend that people go about developing and strengthening their networks and relationships in that kind of context?
Yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Again, I'll go back to your millennial conversation, because one of the gentlemen on it said that more than half of his team, he had never met them face to face, and that really got me thinking about. So I've also taken a job. I've taken a new job in lockdown, and it's really difficult. I find it really difficult, and I find it difficult because I think, I don't know if we all do it, but I like to build a bit of an informal relationship. Those 10 minutes before a meeting starts, when you're getting a cup of coffee, and when somebody takes that away from me and I can't do that, I found it quite difficult to build relationships. So I think I've watched people who are wonderful at filling that 5 minutes while everybody's joining the meeting, to make people feel at ease and tell them a little bit about themselves. Clever the way they do it. It's always it's nice to sit down. I've been busy this morning. I've been, running. I've been walking the dog. I've been climbing a hill. Whatever it is, something they give something of themselves to really start that conversation going. And I think building that personal connection matters to me so much, because once I've got some kind of personal connection, I can I can build, and you can do that remotely or face to face. I think I'm a big fan of buddying or mentoring, and I think in this environment it's so much more important, because if you've got somebody that you know you can phone once a week and just share or vent or whatever it is you need to do, that's really helpful. And if you know your role is to be that person, and and to pick up the phone, I because it's very, very isolating. When you think of, if I go back to my lady in the ironing board, she hadn't seen anybody, so she was isolating. So groceries were delivered to her. She hadn't seen somebody she knew for something like 7 months, and it was, when you think about somebody like that, it's so important that you keep that relationship, you keep that network going. So I'm a big believer in buddying. I think that's important. And also, I've always been a fan of mentoring, and even more so in this environment, because it helps you make new connections. Because if you've got a mentor that's well connected, it's helpful for somebody else to put you in touch with somebody, because it's not easy to form new relationships like this. So I think buddying and mentoring, I think taking the time, again, I loved the informal nature of work life. I loved the time in the lift, the time in the coffee queue, and not having that. I would walk around all of my team every day to say, how was last night? Did you get your tennis lesson? Did you, whatever it was, and so it's trying to find a way to pick up the phone and have that conversation without it being too artificial. So I think you have to get in a mindset of making the time to keep a relationship going, or to find a way to keep that relationship such that you can network with other people. And I think team sessions are good, and introducing other people to join those team sessions so that new relationships can be formed. But it's not easy.
What a really good advice though there, Susan. So finally from me, as you look back over your career, if you were starting out afresh and entering the workplace for the first time, what are the 3 most important lessons that you would try to incorporate into your working life?
That's quite a hard question, Michael. Right, what would my 3 be? I think my first one would be that it's okay to be a journey person rather than a destination person. If that, I'll explain what I mean, what I try to mean. When I first started my career, I worked with people who absolutely knew what they wanted from life. They knew they wanted to do this job for 5 years, and then they wanted a management job, and then they wanted another couple of years of that, and then they wanted to be finance director, and then they wanted to be a chief executive or an executive director, and I had no idea what I wanted to be. And I remember thinking, I hated going for job interviews and somebody asked you the question about, where you saw yourself in 5 years, and I thought, I don't know the answer. Will I make something up? And I used to think about whether I should have a stock answer for that. And then I thought, well, it was actually a mentor of mine so I would have been maybe late 20s, early 30s, and he would have been late 50s, early 60s. And he said to me, he was talking about his son, and he said his son was just leaving university, and he said his son didn't know what he wanted to do yet. And then he said, but I'm not sure I know what I want to do yet either. And then I thought, what a bizarre thing to say. And then I thought about it, and I thought, quite right. And I thought, I'm not going to worry about not knowing what I want to be, but I want to enjoy every stage of what I do. So every job I have, I want to enjoy and think that I get a lot from it. And then I want to do something else. And I don't have to know the direction. I'm happy to kind of go all over the place, but I have to enjoy it. And I've stopped being embarrassed that I don't know the answer to where do I want to be in 5 years. question. So long answer to my first point, happy
Okay.
to be a journey person and not a destination person.
Mm-hmm.
I think my second one would be, I would try and remember that we are working to live and not living to work. I think, you know, we all lose our way in that somewhere in the middle. Or I think I've not always had it. So I would tell myself that and remind myself that going into my career. And my third thing would be about bravery and speaking up. I have not always worked in environments where speaking up has been culturally acceptable. And I do believe, looking back in my career, that diverse workforces that build a culture of encouraging people to speak up get better business outcomes, and they get better fulfilled employees. So I think, and as I say, I've not always worked in environments like that. So I think I would encourage a younger me to be brave and to speak up more.
That is a really interesting point, that last one, Susan. And certainly from my own experience, I find that easier to do as I got older. And also, I think the tone that's set from the top. So when you were chief executive, for example, Susan, I felt very comfortable, and I'm sure others did, sort of, if you like, telling things how they are. That all chief executives were equally open to that kind of candor, because I agree with you. I think it is so important, particularly those on the executive and the board really do, you know what it's like and hear, kind of warts and all in terms of the situation. But I think that way you get better decision making at a kind of board level. But anyway, that's a sort of brief reflection from me. I'd love in the last sort of 10 minutes to turn it over to the audience now, and to see if you've got any comments or questions or reflections or thoughts on what the sort of rich tapestry that we've heard from Susan this evening. So if you do, can you use the chat function, please? Eric's going to sort of facilitate this sort of final part of the session, and you'll be able to do so if you've sort of fed some questions to him. So can I hand over to you, Eric, and see if we've got a few more questions that we can put to Susan in the last 10 minutes.
Absolutely, thanks, Michael, and Susan, thank you. There's been a few questions and comments. Susan did ask me before the event to make them easy, but I said I couldn't possibly do that. But no, if we were to just jump back to the start about the purpose of work and reflecting back in the last 12 months, it was interesting that you had talked about the speed with which things had happened, that it probably would never have happened in normal times. And this was a question that did occur to me. Do you think that perhaps the quality of the kind of decisions and changes that have been made, do you think they've suffered because of the speed, or do you think we've managed to, by and large, preserve the quality of what we've done?
So I think that was always the worry, wasn't it, Eric, that we would act in haste and repent in leisure. I mean, but I don't believe that's the case. I also think we try so hard to be 100% right all the time, and actually 90% would be fine. You can recover some things, and it was for me, it was interesting culturally, because we were acting at speed. We let people fail, so we tried things and they didn't work, and we tried something else. And we wouldn't have done that in my life. I'm sure it wasn't the same in all your organisations, but in my organisation, we wouldn't have done that. We would have done it and tested it and tried it again before anything ever went live. But actually, we just tried it. Some things worked, some things didn't, some things partially worked. But what we did was we communicated to colleagues and to customers really clearly, and we said, tonight we're going to try this. We think it's going to work, but it might not. So bear with us. And people were wonderful. And it's so soul destroying when you're waiting for a fix to go in and it doesn't work. But actually people were great, because at least, we got it right in 3 days rather than in 3 years, which sometimes major projects take. So I do think we took a bit of a risk. Everybody took a bit of a risk, but I think there was some really positive things came from it. This ability to say to people, it's okay to get things wrong. We'll get it right the next time. Everything's a learning opportunity. And as long as culturally we don't say, that's ridiculous, how could you have got that wrong? If culturally you say, thank you so much for trying, let's tweak that and see if we can get it a wee bit better the next day. So my sense would be we didn't lose anything, and actually I think we gained some valuable cultural, because other people wanted to try different things. Let's try this. Maybe they would never have said those things in what I keep calling the peacetime environment.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really helpful. And if it's not too silly an illustration, I think even going to the supermarket has demonstrated that we all have an increased level of tolerance for doing things a wee bit more slowly and not quite getting into other people's space. Doesn't always work, but it's been interesting to see that. It's reflected in business as well. The other question that came out from this particular section was around about you talked about flipping over the percentages, working from home, working in the office. And my sort of initial question to that was, will it persist or will it just snap back to how it was? And linked to that, somebody else has asked the question, do you think we might be moving to an ongoing 4-day week or a completely different way of working like that as we emerge out of this?
Yeah, I don't think we'll snap back. I don't think we'll all snap back, because I don't think that's what people want. And I do worry a little bit about the disconnect between what some leaders think will happen versus what people want to happen. I think we have to think about more flexibility. I think we have to listen to see what works for people. Because again, it's that speed thing, isn't it? Because how many, I don't know for all of your own firms, but you hear a lot about, flexible working doesn't work for us. Well, it does now. It's had to. So there has to be a different model. But I do think, Eric, that we need to take time to work that out, because I have no idea what I'm going to feel like after lockdown eases. I don't know if I want to go back to work yet. I don't know if I want to go into a building. I don't know. People are going to be nervous for a while. So I think it's going to take time to evolve. And I think despite my speed chat earlier, I think we shouldn't rush to a solution, because I think it's going to take us a little bit of time to get there.
That's absolutely fascinating, because as you've been talking, I'm starting to get a small deluge of questions and comments coming in, and you've just addressed two of them. Somebody saying that they think as lockdown happened so fast, we got used to it quickly, but the returning to work will be at a slower pace, and they're saying they actually feel a bit more anxious. Any advice to help? And I think you've said, well, it's a common feeling, and let's take it easy, take it slowly. And somebody else saying, when the restrictions are eventually lifted, would you foresee a more cautious approach? And I think you would probably say it would be the right thing to do.
Do you know what I hope we have? And you touched on it yourself, Eric, when you said that people were, I think you were talking about a supermarket, and you said people were more respectful of people's space. I think people have been kinder in lockdown. At the beginning of lockdown, I noticed a difference in kindness. And I genuinely hope we are a bit kinder as we go into the return, because everybody's going to adjust to this, whatever it is, differently. I think I saw some wonderful, kind behaviours in lockdown. You've seen, I'm sure we all have, some wonderful neighbourly kindness that we've never seen before. I'm hoping we see the same thing from an employment perspective, because if the pandemic's taught us anything, it's about the fragility of life, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. That leads us beautifully into the next point, which was from this whole question of emotional intelligence, EQ. And you talked about sort of giving out the positive vibes while jogging, and my thought was, how do you do this in the workplace? You then talked about the kindness and the link to physical health. Somebody had commented, this is brilliant. But somebody's kind of not challenged it, but actually asked the question. This person says, thanks very much for your insights, Susan, especially the 3 key messages. I was interested in your observation on EQ, which I support, but how far do you think this has been demonstrated by leaders? So that's the wee challenging sting in the tail there.
Mixed. Mixed will be the answer, because it's, you know, as we all have, I think, you know, you work with some wonderful people, don't you? And I've worked with some people that have forgotten more than I will ever know intellectually in my life. But actually, you know, not everybody naturally is good at EQ too. And I think often, you know, people as they go up in organizations, the people who know where they want to go, often it's not, leadership is as much for me about EQ as it's about IQ. And I think it is, you know, as you go through periods of real stress and real change, I think to bring people with you, EQ is very important. It is for me. It doesn't make it for everybody. It's important to me. And I think, but some people have to work harder than others. And so I think the answer is mixed. Some people are great at it, but I do believe that when we think about reskilling, it's for me, it's about refocusing. Mm-hmm. So some jobs will change altogether. And you know, dreadful, I was saying to somebody earlier, I'm having some work done in the house, and you know, a lovely gentleman came today that lost his job as part of COVID, and he's retraining as a joiner, and it was just a joy to have him. It was lovely, and you know, he was a bit slower and he was trying a bit harder, and it was lovely. So a bit of it's about reskilling, but a bit of it's about repointing what we already know and refocusing. Some things I think going forward might be more important than they were before. So long answer, I think how good are they at it? It will be mixed, but I do think it will be more important.
Good. One very short final question then, and it was something that struck me when you were talking about the sort of fairer, greener economy, and you said that the net carbon comment, and you said, somebody says you don't know, and that struck me as being this wonderfully honest comment. And is that a trend that you hopefully are going to see emerging, where there's a much more of an honesty in what we're doing?
I hope so. I do think it's okay to say, I hear you, but I don't know the answer. And if you build that inclusive speak up culture, then somebody else will, you know, the collective will know the answer better than you do. And I think honest communication, I think it's fine to say, you know, great question. I don't know the answer, but I think I know a group of people that if we put our minds together, we can get a bit closer. And I might not know the final answer, but I think I know the first step. So I think it's I hope, in answer to your question, Eric, I hope the answer is that more honesty, because there's nothing wrong with saying, it's a bit like my point about it's okay to get it wrong, as long as you say, right, we tried that and it didn't work. How about we try this? Can't promise you that's going to work, but I'm going to do my best. That would work for me as an individual.
Brilliant. Susan, thanks so much. Michael, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Susan. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I'm sure you'll agree with me that we've had some terrific wisdom and insight from this evening's guests. So on your behalf, let me thank Susan for her thoughtful contribution to our ongoing discussion about how we can look forward to the post-COVID world with a degree of optimism, confidence and honesty. Next month will be the final In Conversation with event in the series, when we'll be speaking to Sally Fraser and Chris Horn. do keep your eye on the Business Matters website and social media for details. But in the meantime, if you would like to follow up on anything we've discussed today or indeed in previous interviews, then please feel free to contact us at Business Matters. We'd love to hear from you. Finally, it just leaves me to say again, a huge thank you to Susan for her time and thoughtful insights. And thanks to everyone who has joined us live for this event or who watch a recording in the days and weeks ahead. So until the next time, goodbye and keep safe.